And for those who don't already know, CAFIDA means learning in Creek. In that respect, today we'll be learning about tribal housing professionalism in your first 90 days from Marie Bonville. My name is Brooke Warrington. I'm the Training and Development Specialist here at the Native Learning Center, and we're also thrilled that you could join us here today. Please follow along as I read the disclaimer aloud. This webinar provides a summary of fundamental concepts, requirements, and/or procedures within the allotted 90 minutes. The material discussed does not illustrate all possible scenarios that could be applicable. We also have included the copyright infringement, so just know any materials presented are protected by copyright, trademark, trade secret, and other intellectual property laws and treaties. Before we get started, I want you to be familiar with some of the features available and how our environment works. So if you look at the top of the screen, you'll see an icon of either a person with their hand raised or just a hand. With that icon, you could either raise your hand, you could agree, you could disagree, or you could step away. Now your screen should look similar to this graphic here. To the bottom left, you'll see a box that says Files. Here you'll find the appendix items that Marie's included. So we have some action verbs for resumes, the Indian Housing Development Handbook, and then Marie has asked that the PowerPoint be included down here too, the PDF of the slides of her presentation today, so that you guys have that on hand for all the helpful information within. She's given us permission to include that. The next box over is labeled Web Links. This is where you'll find our survey about today's webinar, along with any other links that'll be seen throughout today's presentation. Know that as the links come up, I'll just put them into the chat. You don't have to worry about that. And then finally, to the right of the screen, we have the chat box. So this is how you'll communicate with the instructor and the NLC staff. If you have any questions during the presentation, please feel free to interact by using the chat box. You can type your message and hit enter, or click the up arrow icon button to submit. And we do encourage class participation, so feel free to write in those questions or comments. If you have any tech support issues, you can also submit that there. And know that most of our tech support issues can be solved just by exiting the meeting room and re-entering. But let's try out the chat box together now by typing in your name, where you're joining us from, as well as your tribal affiliation, please. And I've included links in the chat to the recordings of Tribal Housing Professionalism Part 1, Resume Skills, as well as Tribal Housing Professionalism Part 2, Interview Skills. So with that, it's with great pleasure I introduce today's webinar instructor, Marie Bonville. And Marie, I'm going to hand it off to you now.
Awesome. Thank you very much. I appreciate, Brooke, your introduction. Thank you to the NLC for inviting me back. And to the folks in the room, I know you're excited about the fact that you've been hired and now you're going to learn how to navigate those first 90 days. So we're going to jump right in and get started. A little bit about myself. I started my career with the Seminole Tribe of Florida in 2007 in various positions that engaged with the housing programs, as well as engaging with our human resources department, right? So for some of you, if you're a housing authority, you're probably all in one. You have someone on staff that handles your HR work. Or in the case of a housing department, you have the ability to lean on the human resource department as a co-contributor to the hiring process, right? So both the elements can have their pitfalls, right? Because you're not the only one involved in the hiring process. But it is important to note that as we bring on the new hires, right, that they're going to have their nerves. They're not sure exactly what onboarding will look like. And so we're going to kind of go back and forth. You're going to go ahead and put your name and your tribal affiliation, whatever organization you're working for, in the chat. And if you want to put which side of that fence you line up with, that's fine as well. And it'll help me as I decide to, talk about you as a new hire versus you as staff that may be managing the new hire situation. So what you might have missed, we talked about resumes and how to develop resumes. One of the key takeaways was the fact that you should probably develop your resume first and then your cover letter, and always tailor your job search to fit your knowledge, skills, and abilities, but also your resume. You want to tailor that resume for each individual job in which you're applying for. Then also, we talked about the interview process. We talked about making that first impression, the nonverbal elements to the interview process in terms of how you interact, how you present yourself, preparing for virtual interviews because that's the way of the future. Hiring dollars being what they are, it costs a lot of money to get people up and running, and so a lot of times those phone interviews or virtual interviews are your pre-screening methods to getting that call back. And then we talked about the method in which you answer questions, right? So, looking at a circumstance that was difficult, maybe they'll ask you a question along those lines, and then you'll respond with that action, right? What did you do that provided clear understanding that you met that expectation for that client or for that customer or for that program or maybe even those resources that you were able to manage. And then lastly, that resolution, right? How that demonstrates that you are right for this job. So it has to also be relevant in regards to the question, right? So it's not a one size fits all situation. You're going to have to really do some homework to make sure that you're prepared for those difficult questions. And I like that presentation as well because it gives you a laundry list of all the types of questions that are asked. And so lastly, I think we talked about that follow-up and the thank you and being present of mind enough to ask, the interviewer's name so you have a name in order to write your thank you note or send that email. So that's what we talked about over the last 2 days. I'm going to check the chat here in a little bit. So make sure you're putting your name, your location, and the organization you work for. But congrats, at this point, after having the resume reviewed, gaining the interview, you now have the job, right? So what does it take to keep this job? You have to understand the boundaries of the job description itself. We'll talk about other duties as assigned. I just did the air quotes there because that's usually a big contention point amongst employers and employees in terms of what is actually in their job description versus what their daily tasks are including. Especially in our line of work, there's high turnover. It's not a secret that we tend to see that certain jobs are hard to place. We also need to evaluate the office culture and successfully help navigate certain pitfalls, right? Things that we are doing that may or may not have an impact on our ability to move forward in certain positions. So it's important to understand that as well. And then lastly, that feedback, right? Getting those early wins to ensuring that you are making an impression, a positive impression and impact in your community, right? You want the clients you serve to see the value in you and what you bring to the table, as well as your employer. So interviews by the number, 86% of new hires who fail in their first 90 days, according to the employers, fail to do so because of performance issues, right? Showing up to work late, not completing the tasks assigned, etc. New hires paired with a mentor or peer or some sort of peer-to-peer training, right? If they've got colleagues with the same titles, then within that first 90 days, they tend to do better because they have someone that they feel comfortable they can ask questions with. So sometimes when you're paired with your immediate supervisor, you don't really want to interrupt them and ask the questions that need to be asked. On average, it takes about 3 to 6 months for a new hire to gain their full potential. And so, according to the Society of Human Resource Managers, uh, it takes an organization $4,500 to onboard an individual on average. So that's a lot of money that they're already investing in your onboarding process in terms of time and energy and technology, right? So think about it from that perspective. If you're getting a new job, know that there's some energy that your employer is putting into this. We'll talk about onboarding methods, whether or not they have some sort of outside of your human resources handbook, whether or not there's an onboarding for your specific position is also something we'll discuss. And then studies have shown that employees who have a positive onboarding experience tend to stay longer within the company. So if they're engaged in the work, they'll be productive, right? So from both sides of the fence, it'll be important for you all to have the point of view from each and from each perspective. So let's look at HR headaches, right? After quiet quitting, does anybody remember quiet quitting? This was right after the pandemic, or maybe, towards that latter half where folks were just kind of saying, okay, I don't know how my work-life balance looks anymore after this, huge experience with the pandemic. Then there was quiet hiring, right? Quiet firing, loud quitting, all these different terms. And now there's this new one called Bare Minimum Monday, which is starting to make their rounds. So HR staff, my heart goes out to you all for making those hard decisions to take a chance on new hires. But once you've gotten that, offer letter, the onboarding process is invaluable. This is where you're going to learn the company culture and expectations. And this is where employers learn to evaluate your performance and your fit for the role. Because sometimes they can see that clearly you're meant for bigger, brighter things. And so they'll start to provide you with those additional tasks. If you're the point of view of the employer, then of course you want to set clear expectations and goals for new employees. Provide those new employees with support and resources to do so. And I know that training dollars are sparse these days, especially if you're in tribal housing and you're trying to commit the majority of your dollars to projects, then it's important to see a way through that allows your employees to get the training they need and in the most cost effective way. And we'll talk about professional associations and other ways that we can do that. You also want to check in with employees. There is this thing in terms of generations and how they value feedback. But your newer individuals that are entering the workforce, they are definitely used to the constant feedback loop, and so it's a good idea to evaluate. Most of us are used to the annual performance review or impact opportunity, but trying to do that more often can sometimes be much more helpful to the employee. And then a positive work environment is what you're really hoping for, right? You really want this person to fit with what you already have as far as staff goes. So most common mistakes for the new hire is failing to establish a strategic priority, right? They don't exactly know what they should be doing for a second, third. They get into the office and it's almost at daily that they're having to figure it out. What will the day bring, right? It's the kind of attitude that they tend to have. Committing cultural and political mishaps. I'd be remiss to say that we are in a political environment. We are in a cultural environment. Working for a tribal community and a tribal government means that you are going to have to make sure that you are familiar and with what is appropriate, especially for the work that you do. For example, outside of the tribal community that I served in South Florida, the owl is a symbol or can be a symbol for education and different sorts of educational material. You'll tend to see the owl with his glasses and things of that nature. For me and for our department as an education department for the Seminole Tribe of Florida, we needed to be very careful about that particular animal and how we use it, if we use it at all. In this case, not to use it at all. So these are the types of things that I mean when I say that you can't you know you can be blind to and treat everyone as best you can without bias, but you are going to have to understand those cultural and political dynamics. Or as I was once told, you got to learn how to row a boat, right? Because there are going to be some difficult waters. Waiting too long to make an impact is probably the third and most important mistake that I wanted to highlight. So we'll talk about impact and what that looks like. Oftentimes, when you're new and you're eager, you'll make mistakes like maybe not going through the organizational chart and connecting with someone outside of that system, which could be looked at perceived as a negative. Even though your intentions were good, there is a protocol, a way in which you needed to have handled that situation, right? So why make a plan for the first 90 days? To help you get up to speed or hit the ground running, all those little catchphrases, you have to have a plan in place. I like to think of it as a preseason checklist. Here are the things that you're going to need to do first and foremost. identifying that first point of contact. Who should that person be? It's not always your immediate supervisor. Initiate correspondence, right? Introduce yourself via email to the staff that are going to be that your job description or your supervisor has indicated will be the individuals you need to connect with on the regular. Be proactive in obtaining this information, and introduce making those introductions is helpful. Sometimes your supervisor is going to be very busy and not able to do those things for you. So managing your personal setup is also something that supervisors will see as a win, right? That they don't have to supervise you getting your phone and extension information set up, for you having to manage getting your emails set up and whatnot. Hopefully there's an onboarding process already within the organization that makes life 10 times easier. But if not, then the fact that you're being proactive on that, those first few days, you may need to like settle your situation in terms of office furniture, computer and laptop for sure, those passwords and emails, setting those things up as well. Your phone, you might be taking a couple trips to HR just to make sure everything gets done, or documents that need to be signed and sent over so that payroll is as it needs to be. Phone numbers, right? Business cards, employee IDs, having your employee ID, like you just getting into the routine of whatever the day looks like for you. I know when we transitioned from the kind of punch in, punch out system, right, to Chronos, which is the use of your finger, your what's the word I'm looking for? When you would use that manual system, it's so much easier, right? Everybody had a hard time with it at first, so they realized, wow, the lines are getting so long. We only have one way to clock in for everybody. It took us a minute to get used to it. And so employee IDs, or the process of checking in, maybe there's a security guard or something like that, or a sign-in book, whatever the case is, because sometimes you're going to have to go between tribal buildings, etc. Uh, the manuals and professional books, I know that we are in a digital world now. And so you're going to get a lot of this stuff via email telling you to look at it. I encourage you all to make note, to return to it. If you are not a visual learner, this is going to be much more difficult. You may want to decide to invest in printing some of this material out. It may be at a cost to you, but a benefit to you, right? So it's worth it. The ROI is there. Whereas with some employers, they just don't have the resources to print these things out. So just be mindful of that. And then personal items, you're going to have to look at the lay of the land and determine how much is too much in terms of the items you want to bring into your office space. And because we are talking to folks that are working in Indian housing, I wanted to let folks know, if you're new to Indian housing, then for sure the Indian Housing Development Handbook is essential. Why is it essential? A couple reasons, and I'm actually going to pull it out here so you can see it. It's located in the files area at the bottom, so you can download that and you'll have it. It's produced by NAHC, and it's written by Brian Pearson. This particular attorney with Godfrey and Khan, he's been doing this. This book actually came out in 2013, and it was invaluable to myself. Just to kind of give you an overview, it gives you a glossary of common acronyms and terms. And I'm sorry, but no one does it better than than HUD in terms of the acronyms and the things that you're getting used to. And so at first you attend certain meetings and they're talking about LIHTC, low income housing tax credit, and they're talking about the IHBG, Indian Housing Block Grant, versus ICDBG, Indian Community Development Block Grant. What about the Ross coordinator? Oh, connect with the Ross coordinator and get who is that and what is that about, right? So there's all of these terms that we need to be familiar with in Indian housing, and this gives us at least something to go off of, that is broken into sections, right? So it talks about common acronyms and terms. Of course, the organizing for effective housing development, that and what that could look like in terms of infrastructure, et cetera. Of course, the legal instruments and things like that, Section 184, Title VI, all the different home ownership options that are out there. So strategies to promoting homeownership, and then the financing sources, right? How and which do we as a community develop housing and housing opportunities? And lastly, the legal environment, things you need to know about the sovereignty itself that tribes have, and how best to um, at least know that these elements are the reason why there's such an impediment to developing housing in tribal communities, right? So it gives you some context. When you're new, it can be really tough. You could maybe have lived on the reservation your whole life, or maybe you've been off reservation and so you're coming back to work for your tribe. And so in this particular environment, maybe you've purchased the house before. You get how it works outside of, um, um, let's say, on a simple system. But for tribal trust land, it's a completely different process. So it's important to kind of have some context there. And this document does just that. So if I just scroll over, you'll see all these the NOFA, right? Notice of funding availability. There may come a time when they're asking you for your input, to support writing a grant, right? So you need to know these things, and so it's really helpful to have this handbook available to you. So that's a little bit about that. I'll get rid of it here. Let's see. Let's get rid of it so we can get back to the presentation. All right. We talked about the summary of contents, so hopefully you'll have a chance to take a look at that. And your employer will thank you, right? Because then there's some onboarding that you were able to do on your own prior to maybe even starting. Contact, analyzing the organizational chart is important, right? The first step is to go up. We want to know who's our boss, who's our boss's boss, and who's your boss's assistant more than anything else, because that particular assistant may be of help in getting you acclimated with their schedules and things of that nature. If they're supposed to be presenting in certain tribal council meetings and other departmental meetings, they may need your feedback, right? They may need your reporting and whatnot. And so knowing that schedule is important. So that's why it's invaluable to make sure you know the up of the organizational chart. Heading on the down right side of this, you want to know who do you have that reports to you, right? So your direct reports, your critical support staff, right? Admin staff, invaluable. Some of us are, I don't, for lack of a better word, visionaries, right? We're big idea people, and we don't necessarily like doing, the smaller but important tasks of keeping us all on track in terms of project development and admin and things of that nature. So, this is why it's invaluable that your critical support staff, you know exactly who they are, that who's got the keys to the supply room, right? Knowing these things is also important. Your direct reports, certainly their performance is a reflection of your performance. So it's important for you to get to know them and know what responsibilities you have towards them and vice versa. Across, certainly, going back to that one statistic, it's really important that you are getting familiar with your peers, those individuals who are going to have direct contact with you daily via your clients, your customers, and strategic housing industry partners, right? So in the case of, anyone housing authority, you've got maintenance staff, you've got vendors, you have subcontractors, you have architects, engineers, those other individuals essential to getting your projects done, but not necessarily a part of the organization, right? So just keeping that in mind, and I'm a visual learner, so when I saw the crossword, it made total sense for me that that's what I was trying to convey in terms of making contact, introducing yourself, having an opportunity to taking folks to lunch or learning a little bit more about them is important. 30 days, why? Well, first of all, why 90 days? Where did that come from, the first 90 days? It's because, typically we're working off of fiscal years, those quarters, and each quarter has a goal, right? In the professional setting. And so the thought is, if you could apply that to your hiring status, then you'll do a good job of making that first 90 days successful. So staying ahead of the learning curve is the first mistake that folks make, right? They're not staying ahead of the curve. They don't understand the lay of the land. Have you looked at your department's mission, vision, and values, right? What is the goal? How do you find that information out? Oftentimes, you're going to find that in the strategic plan. You can find it in the Indian housing plan. If I take it a step further or down, right? I look at things from that crossword perspective, right? So top of mind to me would be, of course, the tribal government itself and their mission and vision and values for their people. But then specifically to your department, hopefully you already have a 5-year strategic plan or a 10-year plan and you can ask your supervisor as to what year you are currently in and where they are in that process. If they haven't had a strategic plan in a long time, right? Then what was the last plan? What did the last plan look like? In terms of the Indian housing plan, that is one way in which you can say, okay, well, here are the projects we said we would do with our funding, and here's what we've done. Here's what we've been able to accomplish. What did our annual performance report say? These are documents that hopefully should be available to you, that you can use to decide to at least know more about the organization and the steps that they want to take and the development that they want to make when it comes to housing. But every roadmap, every position is different. So the strategic plan itself, typically it's more of a analysis, right? It's going to give you typically when you go into a strategic plan, we start with a strengths, weaknesses, threats and opportunities, right? Your SWOT, your standard SWOT plan. And we say, okay, based on those things, what do we want to provide? What would be some of the roadblocks to providing them, et cetera? Of course, we want to include our HR policies, but internal control or operating procedures, we want to have those things. Chances are you're going to be dealing with procurement and have those manuals as well, those procedures that you need to have in place. Again, those program policies are things that you're going to want to review in that first 30 days. And take it seriously, right? So know that, if you have questions, your human resources will determine who you should go to. Departmental trainings, there may be some that are, on a high level scale. They'll say, okay, here's when we're going to talk about XYZ, and how each department will work together. When I worked in education, we worked closely with not human resources. Well, not just human resources, but we worked closely with family services. And so in that way, we needed to attend these interdepartmental meetings so we can gain insight as to what they've got going on. One of the things that can be very frustrating in tribal government and working is that we're all, fighting over the same group of people in terms of just the sheer calendar of it all, right? So when you go to these meetings, you get informed as to what's going on in each department, what events they've got going on, how you could support those events, how you can be present and show up for those departments. Some of the most successful individuals I know in tribal government really support and show that they care about the work of the other departments that are serving our members, right? What else? We've got supervisor support, management support, board and executive committees, or leadership. We need to know of and be aware of their role in the organization. It may not be that you have direct communication with your board members, but you have to know the importance that they hold, right? What is the goal there of the board? And then other stakeholders, right? So if you're getting funding from outside sources, right? It's no longer to get a housing project done with the costs that exist these days. It's not just the IHBG monies or your ICDBG awards. Now it's including AHP or some other other sources of funding. And those stakeholders will want information as well. They'll want additional reporting. Maybe their reporting is not even on the same schedule as those IHP or APR reports, right? So taking onboarding seriously means understanding all of those individual elements, right? Those people and organizations that are really important, and kind of getting a handle on that. Getting familiar with your employee benefits, right? This is another element to motivation, right? You didn't just get high. Of course, most of us get into tribal housing because we want to help our community, but there's also salary motivation and there's employee benefits motivation. Most employees aren't taking advantage of their benefits, and HR um, managers have said, that although they provide these trainings and classes, the majority don't take advantage like they should. So, a health savings account, for example, how to, pay for certain medical expenses tax free, other things, healthcare, childcare, education, whatever benefits that exist. Be careful to take some time. Uh, Maybe not during the workday, but definitely, in the evening, get a chance to get acquainted with your benefits package. So let's talk about the job description because this is the biggest point of contention. That is that your job description outlines your tasks, your duties, your responsibilities in one position. I say one position, and everyone may be thinking, well, I actually wear a couple hats, right? Because as people move and shift and turnover happens, sometimes these positions get morphed. I have seen it where job descriptions haven't been updated in years, right? So that's the other element to this, that they're using a boilerplate job description, and what the job entails hasn't actually been updated in years, right? If that's the case, then you're in a situation when you've got other duties as assigned. The there's You're in your first 30 days, so you have to be careful as to how you address this situation because your expectations are not necessarily meeting the reality. What's on your job description, what is implied, right? There's two different elements there. How do you professionally, without looking like you're shirking responsibility, avoid this increasing request to add elements? There's a balance. The first step should be to communicate with your supervisor as to what you're currently responsible to report, right? What are the things I should be doing? Prioritizing those things, and making sure that you're being effective in getting those things taken care of. 30 days is kind of tough because you don't really have that much of an understanding of all the roles and interactions just yet. So when you receive a request for additional duties, try to get clarification as to the scope, right? How long will I be doing this? Is it priority over the other essential items that I'm supposed to do? And what is the deadline for this particular task? Because it may be one and done, right? In which case you may be making more out of it than it needs to be. Or if it's something that will be recurring, then you need to notate that. This first 30 days is about acknowledging the situation around you, right? What's going on, and notating it. So right now, you're going to take that information and keep a record, right, of your tasks, the complexity, the time it's taking you to complete the task, certain deadlines that were given to you. And the reason why is that this documentation can serve as evidence later on, that these additional duties are actually outside the scope, or it's taking away from the priority, right? Which your supervisor can attest to, if that's the case, because you want to make sure your deliverables are being met, right? Those objectives, those things you're responsible to do, are being met. Know your office logistics, right? Um, Make a conscious effort to learn about the basics so that you look more savvy. You know where the copy machine is. You know how to get and handle certain things yourself. Um, Basic key players as far as HR, IT, help desk. These guys are or girls are invaluable to making your day go smoother. So that first 30 days, you just kind of say, um, I know where things are. I don't need, a person to stop what they're doing. Remember, everyone else is at work doing what they need to do. And anytime you have to stop to ask about these smaller things, it just takes away from the workload. Say yes to lunch. Eating alone during the first 3 months on a job means you're missing out on a huge opportunity to network. You want to make sure that you can, um, you know, get to know your colleagues just a little bit better. There's an understanding of where you came from, right? You can talk about the positions that you've held in the past, or places you've worked in the past. Maybe you have connections that you didn't know you had. You can connect on LinkedIn, and just get a little social in that way. I say lunch because Sometimes that interaction, that ability to be social can't necessarily happen on a authentic level, just in the day-to-day operation, right? Because they're also at work too. And so you don't want to take away time from that. So if asked, go to lunch. Usually that's really where you start to learn personalities, and you can ask them questions. Do you like emails first thing in the morning, or are you the type of person to uh answer emails once a day, a set time during the day, or how do you handle certain situations? You can ask those questions when you're in that sort of setting with staff. um so, what are your strategic priorities when you're at lunch? What's your biggest challenge when you first started? What's some unexplored opportunities, right? I noticed in the strategic plan, we said we would do XYZ and we haven't done it yet. What does that look like? What is that about? Context is really important. I'm a big believer in knowing why. So, what are the cultural and political landmines, right? Is there something I need to steer clear of when I go to a meeting? Make sure I have certain information. I'll give you an example. We I was the GED. I was the adult vocational administrator, and the GED program was underneath that program. It was floundering for several years. Just tutors really didn't have an end in sight. Like, you could tutor a person forever, basically, and there were no check-ins, right? So when I took over, one of the thoughts was that let's go ahead and create sort of a timeline as to how long it should take for a person to prepare for the GED. And we got some new training materials, and we were able to get the tutors to agree to a more consistent line of training versus, kind of haphazard. And eventually we started getting GEDs, and folks were passing the test and moving forward to thinking about vocational options, right? Because that's really was like our first step, was getting them their GED. Um, I went to a meeting in which someone had pulled me aside ahead of time and said, "Hey, you're getting these GEDs, an increase in GEDs, and that's great, but it can also have a negative connotation, which is that we don't want to be promoting this to our high schoolers or individuals, who are in high school and thinking that they can just, take this out and get their GED." So that prepped me, and it was just a colleague of mine, and they just said, "Be careful. We're about to go into a parental advisory committee. Be careful with that, because the question may arise that maybe we're promoting getting your GED versus finishing your high school diploma." And I would have never have thought of it. You know what I mean? I thought, hey, this is one of those early wins that people are talking about. But for me, it could have been perceived as a negative, and I wouldn't have known that without my colleagues acknowledging it, seeing it ahead of time, and helping me navigate that political or cultural landmine, which it would have been. So, and then the reason why I had some things to do with tribal trust and other things, but I wasn't familiar with that just yet. So, and knowing more, I was able to navigate that much better. Communication style. How do you and your manager interact, right? As I said before, when you go to lunch, now you're able to talk about mode, email, voicemail, in person. You know, we no longer have departmental mail as much as we used to, but there are, because now we have e-signature and all these other helpful tools. But definitely, you got to talk about mode. How would you like for me to respond? Are emails really stop what you're doing and answer, or are you comfortable with me getting to it within the day? Right? What most supervisors would say is that they have an open door policy. Um, for those of you who follow baseball, I was listening to Dusty Rhodes. I don't know if Rhodes is his last name or not. Dusty Baker. Dusty Baker. He's the manager for the Houston Astros, and he said that his coach, or the head coach, said that he had a open door policy until the day he walked in and got yelled at, right? Because they don't necessarily, and those guys have a temper, and it's a different professional setting. But the thing is, it's on automatically kind of it's a anxious environment when you have to go into your boss's office to ask a question, etc. And so it's kind of one of those things where you can ask them, hey, would you rather I drop by if I have a question? Do you want you want me to set up an appointment, ask you what time works best for you? What would you prefer? Just asking, giving them an opportunity to give you their preference is helpful. It shows that you understand that they have a workload, and that there are things that may need their immediate attention and their focus, and acknowledges that. I think that's what most supervisors or managers are just wanting, right? They know they have this additional responsibility, and they just wish somebody would notice every once in a while. And that drop in or by appointment question helps you do that. Frequency, right? How often would you want me to check in with you? Weekly, monthly, quarterly? I'd like some sort of formal way to check in as well, in addition to the drop by or the appointment if I have a question. How to be an asset? First, learn your client and your program's responsibilities, right? I have had it happen where um, and this is a tough one because I know sometimes you've got introverts, folks that have worked in a position for a very long time, but don't like necessarily speaking up and speaking out on a specific program topic. But if you want to be an asset, this is one of those key ways of kind of putting your skill out there, being able to say that I know exactly what my program responsibilities are, what clients we serve, and how in which we serve them, what the program requirements are. Think about it from a supervisor's perspective. When you don't know and it shows, the client is going to say, can I speak to your manager? Can I speak to your supervisor? Off the bat. So when you are knowledgeable in what the program offers, you become an asset. They may say, thanks, that's exactly what I needed, and they move on versus having to interrupt and speak to a supervisor or manager, right? So conveying that is important. If you're not comfortable, take that policy and procedure book home and start to review it on your own slowly, taking a little bit at a time, but definitely get familiar with that. Have also seen folks who have worked in organizations for years and they still don't know program policies and procedures, and so then they have to go to the immediate supervisor or manager to get clarification. I have also seen it where folks will say, I don't really care what the answer is, what the policy is, otherwise I'm going to tribal council. And when that happens, you have to be able to clearly and effectively state to tribal council, here's what our policies and procedures say, and this is what we advise the client that we would do. This is the policy or the procedure they went through. And so, of course, then council has the context of knowing that you all did what was it within your policies and procedures and regulations to do, right? Because if you're a housing authority, you've got that element. If you're a housing department, then those policies and procedures also need to be approved by your tribe. So just being mindful of that. Frequently asked questions. This is a pot of gold. I usually start with the frequently asked questions. If somebody's asking over and over again, that means it's not clear somewhere. And clarity is kindness, right? Because if it's clear, then I don't need to go to someone else, and I can move about my day and do what needs to be done. If it's unclear, then now I've got questions. I'm second guessing myself. I don't really know what's supposed to happen next. So clarity is kindness. The best way to find out maybe what you could be working on to be an asset is to look at the frequently asked questions. An example of that is there was a time at the Native Learning Center when we didn't necessarily have we had training specialists. They had come from college and collegiate and other backgrounds, but no one was really foundationally sound in housing, right? So we didn't know everything there is to know about housing just yet. And when we would send a request for training out to HUD, they would deny it. They'd be like, "Oh, no, this isn't fit with our goals." Maybe it's great for your community, and that's wonderful. It's not like the topic is wrong or bad, but it doesn't fit with what we want you all to provide as a housing education avenue, right? So I said, okay, well, if the question is, what should we be doing? What types of training should we be providing? What well, let's go to other trainings and see what's going on. And certainly throughout attending procurement trainings, through pretending um, uh, attending admissions and occupancy trainings, just going out there and sitting. We didn't actually do anything but attend the trainings and hear what was going on in the housing authorities and some of the findings that folks were getting dinged on and things like that. That we said, wow, there's tons of training that we could be doing in these topics, right? Um, when we saw for example, right now, you all are about to experience the transition to maybe becoming a HUD housing counseling agency. That whole process is new. That is something new to tribal housing, something we as an education provider are going to have to be more knowledgeable about and get that training out to you all, right? So it's a frequently asked question now. It's something that we know is on the horizon. So guess what? If I want to be an asset, this is something um, I'm going to take a look at and see how I can put this through as a training idea or topic that we discuss as a department. Program support. Forming any sort of professional relationship can help with others. So asking them about their roles, their projects, their interests. Um, there was some individuals that are just they love learning about new technology and things to assist. They are the ones who told me about Canva, or I wouldn't have known. I knowing their interests helped me seize the opportunity to say, well, what will work best? We've got a new program that we're rolling out, and I need some visuals for it. One of the biggest mistakes folks will do is put their program policies and procedures print it out and put it in the front for their receptionist to hand out to folks. So the application itself just has policies and procedures and the application, and that's that. It's really important that we're taking a step further to pull out those bullets, determine what it looks like, and send it out in a way that is digestible, right? Because you as a professional might be able to handle that, but the average client that's coming in just wanting some information, that's just way too much for them to consume. Certainly if they haven't even filled out the application yet. So there were individuals within my department that I could see had an eye for graphic design, an eye for information and delivering information. And so I would say, okay, if we're going to create a new program or policy, I want to make sure that there's a specific person that gets the question, right? So if someone's coming into the office for down payment assistance, then this person is the best person for them to send. Even if they're not the program manager, they're the best person because they can effectively communicate what that program's about, how it works, and provide them with the information. I might also assign another individual the opportunity to design something that's more visually appealing to the clients, right? For that same reason, I want it to be effective. So that's how you create program support, right? Because then they start to see you're valuable in the way in which you can help the department. Evaluate your external communication as well. I think we're all, there's 6 of us in the room, so I can safely say that at some point you've had an interaction with another department that you thought, okay, well, that didn't go well. I still don't know. I haven't gotten a response. I haven't gotten any follow up. So evaluate your external communication with groups, departments. There were individuals that I knew if I called them, if I email them, they are going to help me. I know exactly within what department I needed to call. So, for example, I was in work experience. I needed to make some job placements for tribal members, and some tribal members would convey that they didn't have their social security card. I knew who to call in family services to get that information started, and also limited the point of contact. I don't need to send the tribal member over to family services to get that information because I have it. Why do I have it? Because I've made that connection with that staff member to say, do you mind if I have the social security information necessary? If I have them fill it out, can I have them send it to you so it limits the amount of times they have to go back to your department and limit that ping pong effect? So again, going back to program and program support, these are the kind of things I'm talking about. Walk through the client's perspective to see how you can make it more effective. Um, Almost in the same way of it's like an end user thing, right? In the technology world, right? People start making things And then once they have people use it, they realize, wow, it doesn't flow as good as I thought it was going to flow. You have to do some of that troubleshooting with your programs as well. Understanding the financial and the technical resources available. This is an understatement. This is why I think that that handbook is so important, because there are a lot of financial tools or ways in which that folks are putting together these community development opportunities for housing and for economic development, and they're very technical in nature. It's one of those things where you really do have to get familiar with that. So, um, program support is huge. Once you've got a good, strong foundation in program support, you can move on to building your personal brand, right? When in general, the definition of a brand is what people say about you when you're not in the room, right? It's that idea that I can envision let's see here, Jelani, and I know exactly what Jelani brings to the table. I know what Nancy brings to the table. So when I look at an individual, I can, and I've experienced their work ethic. Now I can maybe decide whether project management, team building, other resources or reporting that I might need to have done. There's people that I know are going to be perfect from the beginning. I don't have to think twice. That's branding. So the first step is to brainstorm the ways in which your personal touch can accelerate growth, right? You don't want to supersede or overstep your supervisor's reach, right? You want to make sure your managers feel comfortable with the work that you're doing. So it's not to say that you overstep, but you do want to make sure that you're trying to attend as many trainings as you can, right? So the first step, certainly ONAP, Office of Native American Programs, they have trainings that are free to you and to your organization. And the training topics are anywhere between the IHP, the APR, procurement, capacity, environmental review. Environmental review is not for the faint of heart. That's a comprehensive training. Like, there's just so many things that you might want to know about, but you're not necessarily, uh, it's not necessarily a part of your job description just yet, but you'll get there. This is how you can maybe jump in on those trainings and learn more about it in the interim, because this is we're just 60 days out, right? Speak up. You may have started with more listening than talking, which is recommended, but by this stage, it's time to start saying, hey, this is what I think would be helpful, and add to what you already bring to the table. Review your agendas ahead of time. That's a wealth of learning. And I know that many of you may not have this currently in your organization, but technically, and if you're having a meeting, you should have an agenda, and that agenda should be delivered ahead of time. That's the best practice of meetings in general. I know that's not always the case, but the meeting should have an agenda, and that agenda should be provided earlier. If you're the first to do that, or if you start to institute that, you'll already be off to a better start, right? That your meetings, people can say, wow, we're not having an hour-long meeting, a 12-minute meeting that turned into an hour because we had no agenda, right? So people are they value their time. Time is money in the case of sitting in a meeting. And so it's important to know that it's effective. Be honest. Um, there was a meeting that I took. I think I had accepted the position of training and development director. Um, and then we had our first construction meeting. So literally, I was put into a construction management meeting, production meeting, regarding our building, right? And this building was supposed to be, everything that a training facility could want, right? Drop down screens and this, that, and the other, and it was just going to be amazing. And I'll never forget the feeling of being lost, because there was architects and engineers and the construction project manager's there, and he's talking about all these things, and I don't really know everything there is to know about just yet. But I was really, really uh, my goal when I started the meeting was, I am going to find a way to make sure I understand how my training department will interact with this new building, right? So in the middle of the meeting, they said, yeah, so we went ahead and installed the outlets, or the area in which we'll have the Apple TV connectors. And I said, okay, this is my chance. I need to say something. So I asked the question, I understand that there's going to be Apple TV connectors. What about the projectors for the screens? And everybody stopped. And I said, my apologies if this is something that's already been discussed, but I just haven't heard that, where exactly they'll be located. I see where the screens are going to come down, etc. We had started the process. I guess the former director had left. And then somewhere in between all of that, we were about to have a training facility with no projectors, uh, outlets or areas for projectors, etc. So I was just being honest. I didn't understand all of what was going on, but I also needed to ensure that I knew that projectors were available, right? So it's important. And then afterwards, we cleared it up, and they were able to do a what do they call those? They were able to do a work order change, and we were able to get our projectors. So people enjoy them now, and it's really because of the ability to speak up and be honest. We might have gotten too far along for them to have fixed that situation if I had stayed quiet, only because I was new, right? So being honest, just because you're new, you want to just put that on the table. You don't want to be somebody's learning curve, right? Nobody wants to be the first for any person, but I think that most people will value your honesty. Think outside your job description, and take on certain responsibilities. We talked a little bit about other duties as assigned, and I know it might seem frustrating, but thinking outside your JD can sometimes help you in determining what other skill sets you might have that benefit your organization. um, you know, there may be things that pet projects that you think of are value. Maybe working with other departments is just one of those elements that you want to take on. And so you go to education events, you go to, um, the police and fire rescue events because you think that having a booth there with your program services would be helpful, even if you're not necessarily asked to go. But as long as the other department is cool with having you there, I think it's a great opportunity. And it may be outside your number of hours, but if you're a salaried employee, again, becoming an asset is not something that doesn't come with some sort of sacrifice. Quantify and communicate. So it's really important to express the impact that you're having in a number sense. So I'm currently working on this many projects, which is taking up this much time per week. Many of you might have to do that for grants and determining how many hours you're spending on any one particular um, task because of the way the grants is set up. But then also taking on additional tasks, mean that I would require me to spend this many more hours, right? Some folks get frustrated with supervisors because the supervisors can't see how much work they're doing. So when you quantify it, then it's clear for the supervisor as to how many hours you're actually spending on any one task. And then you guys can work on a way to either delegate those responsibilities or alleviate some of that work. Um, and sharing it more equitably amongst the staff, right? Professional development, seeking out those courses, as I said before, so that you're competent in the program and the product knowledge, building personal networks and social media, and by that I mean LinkedIn, mentoring and understanding crisis management. Like when you're in a crisis, what does that look like, right? So in your last 90 days, excuse me, in that last 30 days, right? Here's where you can get more innovative and motivated to do to under promise and over deliver, right? That is one of those industry things where it's like, well, if I can just say if I can do it in 5 days and I tell them that, but I get it done in 3 days, then I've under promised and I've over delivered because I got it to them in less time, right? And so now exactly how long it takes to um, get certain tasks done. Um, Keep evaluating. What should I be reading? What should I be attending? What should I be doing? And who should I be talking to? Right. So you reap the benefits of that if you follow along resources, events, activities, and people. Right. Um, that line of questioning is you evaluating your workload. and balancing it with ways that it could benefit you. Um, have confidence in the fact that you've been doing this work, you have certain leadership qualities, and you want to see it put forth in some way. When I first started with the education department, I knew that I wanted to work with the youth, and we developed a youth council outside of my normal workload or tasks that I was given as an administrator for vocational training. I felt like leadership and political engagement and understanding the legislative side of things, all of these things were important to me, and I thought it might be of value. And so we pitched the idea of having a youth council, and it went really well, and we ended up establishing one, right? So these are the kind of things that only confidence can do, right? When you feel that there's a way in which you can be helpful. Let's see. So being in attendance. As I said before, you might feel more comfortable in your office working, right, than being in large crowds, or especially after the pandemic. There's some folks who just so used, they get some kind of anxiety from being, in groups. But broaden your horizons and get more involved. Volunteer, whether that's with the council, your board, committee meetings, events, those interdepartmental meetings, as I discussed. Be open. Not everyone is responsible to hearing negative things about their performance. So if you want more feedback, ask for it, right? Say, look, I know that some folks might be sensitive, but I want to improve. And so if you were willing to provide that feedback, I'd be happy to receive it. Some supervisors need to hear that. Some managers need to hear that, because otherwise they won't give you any, right? They won't give you any guidance. And I will say that there are some, not all, but there are some managers that are protection based. And what do I mean by that? They're protectionist. They like to think, well, if I show them how to do everything I do, then what do they need me for? Right? So knowing that ahead of time, you can say that your growth is just because you have a mindset that's one that wants to learn. And we'll talk a little bit about growth mindset in a minute. So investing in early win does a couple things for you. One, it fuels credibility. You start to have a reputation, positive, brand that people know, like, and trust. It builds confidence for management that if they give you a task, that you'll be able to accomplish it. I've had it happen where I was supposed to give a report to someone so that person could deliver that message, and in the end, they couldn't attend or whatever the case was, and I had to step up and deliver it. And it went really well because I was confident in my reporting, and I'm sound in my program. I know exactly what my program policies and procedures are. I wouldn't go outside those boundaries to make anyone feel better or worse about a situation, right? Because that's part of it. Sometimes the policies and procedures waver, or you bend a little in how you say things because you're afraid that how the other person might take it. In the case of housing, you pretty much have to go with the regulations and what it says. So if you're confident in that, then you can convey those messages more effectively. Solid team cohesion, right? I would always protect the team. So, our education department had K through 12, it had vocational, it had higher education. I was the vocational side of things and the work experience. So we had a really neat kind of circle where I didn't work with the littles, but I also didn't work with our college students, just yet. Some of them would do work experience, but meaning I didn't touch every single environment that the education department had, and so I needed the team to support me in my work and the programs that I served, and then also vice versa. I would go to the K through 12 stuff. I'd do the face painting or the water dunking contest or whatever it was, because we were a team and I wanted to participate and be a part of that. Perceive um, perceive that you want to be perceived as a net contributor, and that's what I mean by that you're not in it only when the it's your program, or and you have probably experienced that in the past where someone is very involved with what they do and how they do it, but they don't really care about what's going on with others. So be perceived as someone who cares. And to do that, certainly you want to celebrate whenever you can any sort of achievement. Make sure it's quantifiable. But there are times when you're going to make mistakes, right? So if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. Be on time for everything. Evaluate, what's necessary, attire, dress code, and what we did, I could never, yes, I was professional development manager, but there were times where I would be off-putting if I came into a room with my students and I looked like I was headed into a board meeting, just because it wasn't going to be the right fit for the audience, right? My students needed to know that I this is how I would dress for certain occasions, but that there were times when I'd have to dress it down a little bit so that I could stay connected with them and give them time to talk to me, so we had a less formal dress code for that, right? So I had to pay attention to where I was and what I was doing for that day, because I couldn't leave from a meeting with my students to a tribal board meeting, or without having taken into account the fact that I would be meeting with leadership later, right? Make room for personal time. Um, Burnout is huge. So, in that first 90 days, you want to make a good impression, but you also don't want to look stressed out and tired. So be careful with that. And that requires some time management. Avoiding mistakes, but be honest when they occur, is important. Just being truthful. I didn't know everything there was to know about NAHASDA, but I made an effort to say that uh, when I didn't know, I communicated with our ONAP office and I said, "Hey, here's the trainings we'd like to deliver. Can you give me more guidance?" And you know what? They'd be happy to do it, because it alleviates even more confusion. Nobody wants me to toss something up and see what sticks. Everybody kind of wants me to succeed. At this point, 90 days in, I've made an impression as somebody who wants to succeed, right? So they're going to do what they can to give me proper guidance. Acknowledge mistakes with a solution in hand, right? So when you make a mistake, have some other alternative already in your mind as to what you can do to make it right, is one way of handling it. So avoiding taking on too much and losing focus. So this is one of those things where here I am telling you all the ways in which you can increase your visibility in an organization. But sometimes you have to say no, right? If you take on too much too early, there is a chance that you won't be able to do it effectively. So it's that idea of uh, not doing these things well. And we don't want that, right? So if you can handle it and it's going to be quality work, then fine. But if it's going to take on too much and you're not going to hit your deadlines, then it might be worth taking a step back. Choosing an early win projects that fail to build up momentum, right? So here are the things that really don't make much sense to you just yet. If the project you choose doesn't give your leadership momentum, right? You don't see the outcomes. You don't have any deliverables that you've met. Other stakeholders may also, see the letdown. So misery loves company. Another mistake or issue that I find is that there aren't individuals who aren't necessarily happy at their positions, and so you got to be able to stay clear of or steer clear of negative information that comes your way about colleagues, about departments. There is that dynamic where it's like my department doesn't work with your department and has nothing to do with us, which can be frustrating sometimes because you can see the value of working with another department or another group within your department, excuse me, but no one else sees the benefit. So misery sometimes loves company, and you got to be able to use your discernment and and be balanced in how you move forward. So nonverbal messages, certainly, if you're listening to someone that's active, it should be active. In the case that you're paying attention to what they say, it's 2023, and I'd be lying if I say we don't always multitask, right? We are on our computers, we're checking our phones, we're maybe deciding on dinner later, we're doing all these other things, and we may not be active listening. So that's you can always tell when someone's not listening to you. Attire sends a message every day, right? So being mindful of you paid attention to the office and the office environment. Yesterday we talked about dress, and dressing for the interview. And depending on your organization, the dress for the interview really just is a continuation of how you'll dress throughout the work week. But sometimes it's a little different, as I said before. If you work with the youth or other departments, or or there's certain events that are being held outside, etc., then you might be looking at a more casual situation. But you got to understand the lay of the line and make sure you're dressed for every occasion. Office and workspace management. I have had the pleasure of working with folks that are super organized, and I have had the pleasure of working with folks who cannot find their last Post-it note to save their life, right? So does that mean that their work was better or worse than the other? No, everybody's got their own style. But I will say that sometimes that it does send a message, right? When you've got an untidy workspace and it's just kind of unmanageable. If you were out for the day and another coworker needed something from you, well, then it would be a much harder thing to do, to advise them as to where to look, etc. So just being careful with nonverbal messages. And people are watching your routines. So you may not be late for work every day, but you're late coming back from lunch, right? Those are the types of things to consider. Uh, Now we are in a political environment sometimes, and it could be that folks are also paying attention to certain relationships and saying, well, she's never late except for when, right? So and so comes and they go to lunch. So remember before I said, of course, misery loves company. And so there could be some of that. But over time, you are going to create a habit and a routine that people are used to. So with social media, this is another kind of pitfall, things that people maybe forget to pay attention to. So I just wanted to bring it up again, that you want to check your privacy settings. I have had it happen where folks have called out sick, but they were just fine for that Marlins game, right? Or they were just fine for that concert. So um, people pay attention to that too. I mean, I'd be lying if I said we didn't. As managers, we have a responsibility not just to you all as our staff, but also to our employers, to our positions, and you are a reflection of our performance as well. So if you're calling out and that's putting a strain on our resources, then that's going to be a problem that needs to be addressed. Posting inappropriate content, is a part of that, and that's just a standard HR thing. Complaining about your current job or employer, right? So I tell you no, you can't take the day off, and next thing you know, I see it on Facebook. These things happen. It's a red flag to us. Makes you look unprofessional. So it's just one of those things where definitely you need to be careful with it. LinkedIn, I think it's a valuable tool. We've been talking about it over the last couple of days. It signals to hiring. To once you've gotten the job, it signals that you are enthusiastic and committed to the work, right? So the thing about LinkedIn is that you've got the ability to say, here's all the skills that I have, and people can endorse you, right? They can say, yes, I've interacted with this individual and she does have public speaking skills, or she does have reporting data analysis skills, right? And so all those individuals that you encounter in your first 90 days can endorse that, and in previous employers as well, right? Previous colleagues. So sometimes in the past, it used to be once you leave a job, that's it. You never hear from these people again. With LinkedIn, they can actually endorse your skill set and show your current employers that you are familiar with the industry, right? That's a big part of it. Show your enthusiasm. With everything going on, there's going to be a lot of emotions, a little bit of a roller coaster at first. But there are going to be times when you're confused, you're lost, you're flustered, you're discouraged. You're going to wish you hadn't have said that one thing or done this one thing. But never let them see you sweat. Brooke and I were talking earlier about the fact that you might look like you have, if you envision water and you think that it's cool and calm at the surface, but underneath, your feet might be treading water, right? You might feel like you're drowning, but try not to let it bother you. There are things that are benefits to being new. And the first is learning opportunities, right? Those individuals that have been doing tribal housing for a long time have seen policies change, procedures change, technologies changed. And so, you are new at this, but you have the ability to learn so much more and build from their knowledge, right? So accessing workshops, seminars, webinars, conferences. You're doing it right now, which is amazing. These are the way you stay up on the latest trends. Maybe you didn't know that the HUD housing counseling situation was going to happen soon, right? For tribal entities, there was a time when we weren't allowed to go down that road of getting certified. So this is a good thing, but it's going to require you to stay up on what's going on with that particular situation, right? Resources, gain access to research, publications, tools. Anytime a new white paper comes out or something like that, it might be worth listening to. And I will say, we kind of get wrapped up in the native the native housing elements and procedures, and I'm totally all for it in what we do. But it's nice sometimes to look at other organizations, professional organizations, and see how on a national scale, what is the largest housing authority in the country? How do they operate? What does that look like? Well, what is their operating budget? How exactly does that work? It's good to kind of see and gain knowledge from the industry itself, and then siphon through what will work and what won't work in your communities. So professional associations are key. One, it's advocacy. So if you're not familiar with a professional association, typically there's some sort of membership, right? Either that can be the organization that you work for, right? So the Muskogee Creek Nation might have a membership with NAHC, and then so they're members, therefore they can have so many individuals attend certain conferences or trainings, etc., for free. And they're advocating, right? They might be going to in the case of NAHC, for sure, they're advocating in Congress for the industry related issues that matter to us, right? They're advocating for that reauthorization of NAHASDA and other things. And so there's that. There's the advocacy piece. This is why they've got their pulse on what's going on, and not just NAIHC, but associations in general. Also, they tend to provide job opportunities. They'll have job boards in areas where you'll see executive directors and other positions listed, to kind of, since we're all in the same industry, right? Mentorship opportunities might exist. Programs for professional development might exist. Community involvement, of course, will exist in these organizations as well. So you get those industry updates, legislative changes, regulations, industry news that affect your role, peer support. I mean, talking about being an asset, I've used this to my advantage, because a lot of times I'll know what's going on outside of our environment, and I'll let folks know what's around the corner, in terms of interest rates, for example, was one of the big ones. I was able to see that from outside of the native perspective, and just in being in the housing industry, in other ways, right? And of course, recognition. Membership, sometimes you can learn to be a part of and add committees to your work if you have the bandwidth and you want to go to attend certain committee meetings for the association. Then you'll learn more about the inner workings there as well. So I listed a few housing related associations for you. Of course, NAIC, Native CDFI Network, is a big one, as CDFIs take on a stronger role in providing additional capital for housing in our communities. UNAHA is a good organization. It's local to tribes in that particular area. Great Lakes Indian Housing Association, South Dakota Native Homeownership Coalition, National Association of Housing and Redevelopment Officials. So this one is not native, but I have actually become a member of that organization, and their trainings are invaluable to me, in that I gain so much in terms of industry standards in housing and in affordable housing, specifically outside of the native in the tribal environment. So, but it's been very helpful to make me a more well-rounded housing professional. And then, of course, HUD has a professional associations list, so you can check that out. It's huge, but you can look at that list and see what might work for you as well. So going back to what I was saying before about your mindset, there's such a thing as a fixed mindset and a growth mindset. And so for that person who's saying, my manager doesn't give me all the information I need, and they might be protectionist. I'm not going to say that that's not sometimes the case. some of these environments don't necessarily have that many jobs in the area. And so they're staying in this job as long as they can. And sometimes that's at a detriment to the organization because they're not giving knowledge, context, etc. So when that's the case and you run into that, you have to say to yourself, well, am I going to have a fixed mindset or a growth mindset? A fixed mindset essentially says, I've learned everything there is to learn. I avoid new challenges. I think that in most cases, changing something may be too hard for us to do as an organization, and I just don't want to do it. I may want to expect a reward without the effort. As I said before, some of this stuff may seem like it, well, heck, in the first 90 days, I just started, or they're lucky to have me kind of thing. Whereas, you might have to sacrifice in order to show that you are an asset, right? That there are things that you want to bring to the table. Ignoring feedback for sure. If they give you certain directions and you don't take them, and you're threatened by the success of others, then yeah, that's a fixed mindset. A growth mindset is the complete opposite. It believes that the person's belief is that they can actually embrace a change and that intelligence can be developed, right? You can always learn more, that you're not stuck, that I can train my brain to do new tasks, to learn new procedures, that effort is important to mastering any one skill. And so as long as I put in some additional effort, I'll be the first to tell you I am not a numbers person by nature. Like they kind of freak me out. And that's really hard for what we do, right? If I'm a financial wellness training or if I'm doing some sort of procurement or something along those lines where we have to talk about numbers or percentages, I know that. And so I have to put in a little bit more effort to make sure that I feel comfortable when I'm training. But knowing that hasn't changed the fact that I'm going to do these trainings. I just put the information out there ahead of time. If I get this number wrong, hopefully there's a CPA in the room that'll help me get it right, and we joke, we laugh, but we move on and we figure it out and we grow, right? That's the point of a growth mindset. Learn from feedback. Again, asking, hey, I don't know how you provide feedback. It may just be the one time a year, and that's fine if that's what the organization has and if you don't have any extra time. But I would love additional feedback if you're willing to give it to me. Most supervisors would love to hear that because there are times when we feel like there are ways that you could improve as an employee, and if we know that door is open, we'll take it. And then also inspired by success of others. I'm sure we've all experienced a person that hears about a success of someone else, and the first thing that comes to mind is, why not me, right? Rather than good for them. I'm glad to hear it, right? So just thinking about whether or not you're coming to the table with a fixed mindset or a growth mindset could be the difference between growing in an organization or not. So how do you have a growth mindset? You get proactive, take initiative, don't wait to be told what to do, ask questions, seek out feedback, build those relationships with your colleagues and your managers, not to the point where it's inappropriate, but make sure you just have a strong understanding of where they're coming from, learning a little bit about them and why they do what they do, what they love about the job. Be open to learning new things, taking on new challenges, be enthusiastic, be positive. If I didn't like what I did, at some point my voice might have trailed off. I might have lost the energy. I've been talking for over an hour and a half now. But I love what I do. And so I have to stay enthusiastic and positive, and then people can hear that over the webinar, right? So 90-day reflections. Sometimes you got to take a break and kind of step back. So it's been 90 days, assess your performance, right? You don't need necessarily a manager to do that for you. You can do it yourself. What have I achieved in the last 90 days? What am I most proud of? What challenge have I faced? What have I had to overcome? What's something I learned, right? I had a job. I just started out as a program manager, and my assistant, she and I loved her for it. She was the most organized person I'd ever met. But come 4:45, once her pen cap was on, she was done. Like she was actively shutting down. That by 5 there was no talking to her like at all. she was literally shutting down her day. That was her process. It was her way of getting ready for the next day. Like it wasn't that she was taking advantage of or leaving early or anything like that. She just had a process for winding down her day. And I learned to respect that early enough that when there were certain questions I needed asked or answered, that I would come to her and say, "Hey, before your shutdown, right? We joked about it. We found a way to communicate, and the same was true of myself. I knew that I'm not the best in the morning, and so we would have the running joke was, no files until I've had my coffee, right? I can't necessarily address any file concerns until I've been able to get that little bit of caffeine in my system. So these were some things that I thought were wins because, we were able to develop a great workflow as a result. She and I worked really well together. What support do I need or what does she need from me? I wouldn't have known that. I was able to say in that last 15 minutes of the day, do you want to let me know what you need for tomorrow or what I can do to help you? Is there something that you're behind on that I might be able to assist you with? As a manager, I need to also be humble and say, okay, there are times when I don't have the workload this week that I had last week. Maybe there's something I can do to help someone else, right? So just thinking of it from that perspective, what can I reflect on? What can I do better? These are other questions you can ask yourself. How well did you understand the responsibilities and the goals that were asked of you? How well did you meet your expectations? How well did you contribute to the team's overall success? Um, Another word on benefits, it's 90 days now. Make sure you're using your health benefits. I will say, not in the, be careful with days off. So, like, one thing I didn't mention earlier is you should have let your employer know ahead of time if you had time that you planned on taking prior to starting the job. I mean, I have had where I had it happen where a new hire, we hired her. She started on a Monday, and then that Friday she said, "Oh, by the way, I have a 2-week trip to Hawaii that I'm taking," and it was never mentioned, not in the interview process, not after, not during the screening, like for the HR stuff. At any point, she could have said, "Hey, this is what I already had planned." We know that sometimes there's some financial that's a big cost to change a trip like that. It was, a family trip. So all it would have taken was that heads up, right? We want you to use your time that you're accruing, but there have been instances where we saw excessive use of, like before they could even earn 2 hours of time, they're already taking 2 hours of time, that type of thing. So just be careful because people are paying attention to the routine, but we want you to use your health benefits and learn more about those. Preventative care, pay attention to all of this stuff because it's costly to the organization, and the fact that you're not even using it is just crazy. Take advantage of wellness programs. Sometimes those offer discounts, membership classes, healthy activities. Now after the pandemic, so many of us have got this. It's just returning to the workforce means you're also behind. There's new resources and funding that we all received that we're trying to, um, you know, if anybody got the half funds, I know that's added its own level of stress in terms of additional regulations, policies, procedures, things you're learning about. And so it's really tough sometimes to look at the mental load of it all. That it may be a good thing for you all to pay attention to the health and wellness activities that are out there and ask for help. Sometimes you've got to go back to the drawing board and say, "Hey, I know you gave me the package in the beginning. It's been 90 days. Would you mind just making sure that I've set up everything I could up until this point?" And typically the HR person will help you with that. No problem. Remain thankful for the experience. Sometimes gratitude, they say that, just having a gratitude mindset is half the battle. Lack of gratitude is a major factor in driving dissatisfaction, right? So we talked about absenteeism and burnout. These things happen sometimes because of a lack of gratitude. Every position, whether you have a good experience or a negative one, is some sort of learning that's taking place. Regular gratitude journaling or being able to say that you learn that you got something from any one activity is shown to result in a 5 to 15% increase in your perceived optimism, and also a 25% increase in sleep, people. I love sleep and anything that will make it better. We have stressful jobs. We work in communities where maybe we might be addressing homelessness and serving our homelessness community. You're serving Native veterans. You're serving folks where they don't know where they're going to put their head at night. And so we kind of take some of this stuff home with us. 53% of employees would stay at their company if they felt more appreciation from their management, right? So it might be a good idea to set up some time to have your employees decompress, to have some time to talk and laugh and joke with each other in a way that's obviously professional, but that gives you an opportunity to be a team. Oh, you're welcome. I appreciate you all attending. In this last couple slides, I just want to say that there's a 90-day tip for success. Stay up to date on communication. So as technology changes, you'll have to change. We talked a little bit about AI in the last couple trainings, so be sure to check out what's happening with that. Some people are, hey, it's going to take over our jobs. We don't have any jobs anymore. And other people are seeing to again, apply a growth mindset and say that for now, I'll just use what I can to benefit what I can, right? So sometimes chat bots are taking over and can provide 24/7 support. That's a good thing, right? Your clients don't necessarily have to feel like you're not on the ball, even when you're not at work. Even in affordable housing, remember that client experience, application, intake, placement, maintenance, exit interviews. There's a lot that's happening regarding client experience. We know that many of the things outside of tribal housing are automated, right? They're not necessarily online applications, etc. Just ways in which the world is changing. We have to be able to adjust. So think about that. And then I'll lastly celebrate, notice your growth and reward yourself for the progress. So thank you so much for being here. Good luck on your job. And I appreciate you all being here for the last 3 days. If you have any questions, certainly you can check out these free resources that I've provided. But if not, you can put questions in the chat, and I will see you all soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Marie, for this amazing presentation, the whole series. I know I found it helpful while I was doing all the edits and even while I'm listening to you throughout the presentations. I told Marie earlier that I just wrapped up my first 90 days here at the Native Learning Center earlier this month. And so when I was looking through today's presentation, I was like, so much stuff I could have done a little better, but then was also feeling very validated in some of the choices I did make in the beginning. So make sure you take advantage of the PDF being in the files, because all those links, you'll be able to just click them right inside of the PDF. And that way you have access to all of these amazing resources that she shared. I did copy and paste them in the chat, though, if anybody needs them. I went ahead and launched today's survey probably like a minute ago. I wanted to catch some of you before you exited. But please take a moment to fill out our survey. It only takes a minute or so. Your feedback really helps us to do more of what's working well and work on the stuff that's maybe not. And we're able to provide that feedback to Maria as well, so she can get the gratitude and what you think about her presentation. So we really appreciate you guys taking the time. Our next webinar, incidentally, is tomorrow. This is the last part of the Tribal Grants Management series. This is part 4 with Vince Franco. Registration is free. It'll be 2 p.m. Eastern time. And feel free to access this and any other recorded webinars online on our website, nativelearningcenter.com. We have a Cathedra Webinars Learning tab featuring a recorded webinars section. So you can click on any one of those webinars and you can see what we've done over the past 2 years. They stay up. So feel free to view those and share them with your friends and colleagues. I did include links to the recordings of the past couple of days of Marie's series. So if you scroll up to the top of the chat, and I'm going to include them once again. These are the links to the recordings, of Tribal Housing Professionalism Part 1 and Part 2. And I just copied and pasted all of that into the chat again, if any of you weren't in the beginning and maybe didn't see that message. And last but not least, please also check out our upcoming events. They're posted to our various social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, and we have a podcast titled Hopathanga Native American Podcast, where we discuss focused topics within tribal housing and self-determination. So you can listen to that on Simplecast, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and you can view the video recordings with our guests on YouTube. So once again, thank you so much to everybody for joining us today. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day, and we hope to connect with you guys real soon. I can see that some people are still typing in the chat, so I'm going to hang back for a second. It looks like you guys are showing Marie some love in the chat. She is amazing. But yeah, thank you guys all for joining us today, and I hope to see you back tomorrow if you're going to be participating in the Tribal Grants Management Series. Otherwise,